Welcome. It is Mitch. I am on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Love the support as we try to do what? Build this from nothing to something. It's hard for me to sit still talking about this matchup on Sunday. It is. I'm antsy. It's Thursday. It's not really even close to Sunday at noon. It doesn't feel like it. We haven't even hit the weekend. And it's hard. I'm trying not to swing in the chair. It's hard. I'm trying not to move back, move forward, trying not to stand up. Just sit still. Just sit still and relax. It's hard. It's hard for me to do that right now. Packers-Vikings, 2-1 Green Bay, 3-1 Minnesota. Clashing, butting heads, Sunday at Lambeau. And so it's difficult right now for me to try to sit still. I'm antsy about this one. It's a big one. Week 4, you can roll your eyes, you can scoff at it. It's a big one. NFC North rivalry, two teams jockeying for positioning in the division right now. Sam Darnold, what a revelation he's become for the Vikings. A rejuvenated project. A former first-round pick that was thrown aside by the Jets, thrown aside by Carolina, a backup in San Francisco. Now all of a sudden is probably one of the MVP frontrunners through 3 weeks. Like, come on. What are we doing? Is it gonna hang on that way? Is it gonna keep going, trending in that direction? I don't know. This is Final Thoughts, Packers-Vikings on a Thursday. Appreciate anyone who clicked. You see, I'll try to put an arrow. I'm probably going to point the wrong direction. One of these corners has the subscribe button. Go ahead and click subscribe if you haven't already. I know everyone wants to talk about Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones playing at Lambeau this weekend, but this time he's going to be in purple, not in green and gold. And everyone wants to talk about that. Everyone wants to talk about Justin Jefferson against Jair Alexander. Two heavyweights at their position. A top-tier corner and a top-tier wide receiver. In my opinion, the best wide receiver in football. That's where a lot of the attention goes towards, rightfully so. That's not going to be the key in this game on Sunday. It's not going to be what Aaron Jones can do. It's not going to be whether or not Jair can contain Justin Jefferson or Justin Jefferson can take the lid off the defense and go insane. That'll have a big factor in it. It'll have a large say in how this game comes to be and gets to the final triple zeros on the clock. But the big thing in this game, the overriding number one top bullet point for me, is the chess match between Matt LaFleur and Brian Flores. Vikings defense has been that good this year. Packers offense with Malik Willis for 2 of the 3 games has been that tremendous as well. That, to me, is the number one thing to watch. You guys know I bring numbers to the table. They're always numbers that matter. I don't use them as filler. I don't try to suffocate you with too many numbers. There are plenty with the Packers offense and the Vikings defense that matter for this matchup. Green Bay's first in rushing yards per game, 204 per pop. What's most impressive about that is they've done so the last 2 weeks when the opponent knew that would be the bread and butter. Do you know how demoralizing it had to be for Indianapolis' defense and Tennessee's defense to know, like, hey, there's no Jordan Love. We respect Malik Willis, but Green Bay's obviously going to lean on the run. Josh Jacobs had 32 freaking carries against Indianapolis. They couldn't stop a nosebleed. Tennessee did better, especially on runs up the middle. Jacobs had, I think, barely over 40 yards, but Willis had over 70 yards rushing. Emmanuel Wilson had 50 yards rushing. Green Bay gashed Tennessee on the outside with the runs. Do you know how demoralizing it is to be a defense and know going into it like, we need to stop the run? That's clear-cut number one objective, and you still can't do it. Knowing what the opposition is going to feed and put right on your plate, there's nothing they could do about it. Now, Malik Willis made plays down the field with his arm. That first drive, he had 2 passes of 30-plus yards. A beautiful ball to Watson up the far sideline that set Green Bay up 1st and goal. And then Willis danced his way into the end zone on a rushing touchdown. But in large part, the last 2 weeks, Green Bay hasn't really hid from it. It's run the ball without Jordan Love, and they did so successfully. So for them to be first in the NFL in rushing yards is one thing. To be first in the NFL in rushing yards in the last 2 weeks, the opponent knew that's exactly what you were going to try to do and go back to that well again and again and again, and to still have success doing it, it really shows how much Green Bay's been able to just flex their muscles and run it at will against the likes of the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans. Now, on the flip side of that, the Vikings are second in rush yards allowed, 71.3 per pop. But They're 26th in passing yards allowed at 239.3. However, why I think that second number, the latter of the two, doesn't really matter. Vikings are 26th in pass yards allowed. Look at the games they've played. They were blowing out the Giants in week 1. I mean, they were blowing out the Giants. Daniel Jones and company had no choice but to pass the ball. Was it effective? Not really. But they really got some garbage time yards with the Vikings defense that was up so much, and they didn't want to give up the big play. Now, Brian Flores still brought pressure, but the Giants had no choice but to throw, and so they racked up some yards that really didn't matter. Didn't have an impact on the game. Same thing last week. The Vikings, and it sounds crazy to say because I just didn't expect this from Minnesota 3 weeks in, but the Vikings were absolutely manhandling the Houston Texans to the point where C.J. Stroud and company had no choice but to just throw it and completely abandon the run. And so they got some, cheap passing yards, but the game was well out of reach. Was it 34-7, I think was the final? Like, the game was over. And the Texans, the game was over early third quarter, in my opinion, when the Vikings kept racking up points and Houston had no response. And so I look at the Vikings rush yards given up, and you could say, well, their second rush yards allowed. Is that because the opponents are doing nothing but passing because they're falling behind early? Could be the case, but if you go back and watch some of these games early on, I mean, especially week 1 against the Giants tried to establish the run and couldn't. Houston, they didn't have Joe Mixon, they didn't have Pierce. They tried to establish the run with Cam Akers and couldn't. And so there are differences there, whereas the pass yards are 26th, but the opposition's been having to throw against Minnesota because they're building these massive, massive leads. But I look at those numbers and I still say, all right, it appears Minnesota has a pretty good run defense, we think. Green Bay's first in rushing. But what's the wild card here? Jordan Love. Enter number 10. I think Jordan Love's playing Sunday. I truly believe that. 2 weeks ago, if you remember, I think I used the word stunned. I either said stunned or shocked. I said I would be stunned or shocked, one or the other, if Jordan Love was out there week 2 against Indianapolis. Green Bay has a history of the medical staff being very conservative, not rushing players back, being more hesitant to do so instead of just throwing them back out there when things may not be 100%. So I said I would be stunned or shocked if Jordan Love was out there week 2 against Indianapolis, and he wasn't. Last week, sounded like it was a game-time decision. I still said I think it'll be Malik Willis, but who knows? The whispers were a lot more louder about Jordan Love, but he was out there pregame warming up against Tennessee. That truly sounds like it came down to the last minute, and I'm sure Jordan Love said, I'm good, and the doctors are like, we're still not comfortable. So if he was that close against Tennessee last week, I'm assuming Jordan Love's playing Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings. So I'll use that same word I used back in week 2. In week 2, I told you guys I would be shocked if Jordan Love played against Indianapolis. I would be pretty shocked if he wasn't out there Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings. And it sounds so weird to say he's a wild card here, but he's returning from injury. It's been the Malik Willis show the last 2 weeks under center for Green Bay. And it's a Vikings defense that has stopped the opposing running game. But even though game has dictated the yards they've allowed, how they've kind of racked up in the passing department, Jordan Love can be that difference maker. Big time. And again, it sounds weird to say because we all know that with Jordan Love, but it's the fact that he's missed the last 2 weeks. Brian Flores, you don't know how much gamesmanship is going on here, but Brian Flores said earlier in the week at a press conference they're preparing for 2 quarterbacks in 2 different styles. And I kind of take him at his word for that. But I also think if we're sitting here and most of us believe Jordan Love's going to play Sunday, the Vikings probably think Jordan Love's going to play Sunday too, right? They're not naive to it. They saw him warming up on the field before the game against Tennessee, and it sounds like it came down to the last minute or the last half hour before inactives were released, last hour, whatever it is. When are inactives released? 90 minutes before kick, right? So the Vikings are not stupid. They're not naive to any of that. They're not, they have that information. And so I think Brian Flores partially telling the truth. Hey, we're preparing for two different schemes because the offense they ran with Willis is not the offense they would run with Jordan Love, and we're preparing for 2 different types of quarterbacks, but they probably know it's Jordan Love. And I know a lot of Packer fans, because I've been hyping up the Brian Flores defense the last couple of weeks now when we do our NFC North Outlook, and that video will come out tomorrow for week 4. And a lot of people will look back at last year on New Year's Eve when Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur, and company just torched Brian Flores' defense on New Year's Eve in Minnesota at US Bank Stadium, eliminated the Vikings from playoff contention and propped the Packers up even higher They eventually, of course, clinch a wild card spot a week later in the win over Chicago. And in that game last year, the Packers scored 33 points against Brian Flores' defense. Jordan Love had 256 yards, 3 touchdowns. Aaron Jones, obviously not in the picture anymore for Green Bay, had 20 carries for 120 yards. I'm going to caution you, and I know a lot of Packer fans probably won't want to hear this. I promise you I'm not exaggerating when I say this. This Vikings defense is way more comfortable year 2 under Brian Flores than they were in year 1. There's different pieces in there now. Shaq Griffin at corner, Stephon Gilmore at corner, Danielle Hunter out of the picture from Minnesota goes to Houston. But this defense, you can tell the guys who have returned, Byron Murphy, Harrison Phillips, Harrison Smith, those Ivan Pace, he missed last week. But those guys are a lot more comfortable year 2 under Brian Flores because it's a complex scheme that Brian Flores runs. It really is. It's blitz happy, but he is the king. He's the master of changing the photo for the opposing quarterback pre-snap. So they have to decipher a lot of different looks at a lot of different angles. And so you have to be on top of it as a defense to be in the right places at the right times to try to fool the opposing offense and the opposing quarterback. And you can just tell, I don't know how many Vikings snaps, Vikings games you guys have watched if you're a Packer fan watching this video, which I assume most are. But it just looks like a more confident defense. It is a more confident defense, a defense that finally is understanding the ins and outs of Brian Flores' scheme year 2 compared to last year in year 1. Vikings are only allowing 10 points per game. They're allowing 10 points per game in 2 of their 3 games came against San Francisco and Houston. We put Kyle Shanahan way up on a pedestal for his sorcery as an offensive mind. Houston with C.J. Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs. Joe Mixon was out last week, but Dalton Schultz at tight end. A good offensive line. We prop Houston's offense up as, hey, one of the better offenses in the league. Vikings are allowing 10 points per game. That's not going to sustain throughout the course of a year. Point is, though, they've played 2 pretty good offenses. I know San Francisco was missing Christian McCaffrey. They still ran it pretty well against the Vikings. They were the only team of the 3 to do so. Houston, I know, was missing Joe Mixon, but that offense is more pass-reliant than anything. With Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, they couldn't do anything. It is a really good defense for Minnesota. It's a defense that people who aren't fans of the Vikings would be hard-pressed to name a whole hell of a lot of the contributors on that defense. This isn't San Francisco where you look at it and you're like, oh, Bosa, Warner. It's not Pittsburgh where you're like Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt. It's just a bunch of dudes, and it's working. And I think it's working mostly because of Brian Flores. They're second in blitz percentage, which should surprise nobody. I mentioned he's the king of changing up the image, changing up the picture for an opposing quarterback and what he's looking at, bringing pressure from any and everywhere. Vikings are second in blitz percentage this year, blitzing on 39% of opponent dropbacks, and that's actually quite a bit down from last year, where they blitzed on nearly half of opposing teams' dropback situations. 39% trails only the Denver Broncos, who are blitzing like crazy. The quarterback doesn't have long to try to put the pieces of the puzzle together against a Brian Flores defense. They did so very well. Green Bay did last year on New Year's Eve against Minnesota. It's a more confidence defense for the Vikings. I'm not saying all this to suggest Green Bay's doomed. Jordan Love isn't going to do anything. The Packers aren't going to do anything offensively. Look at what Matt LaFleur has freaking done the last 2 weeks with a backup quarterback. And that's not taking anything away from Malik Willis, and it's not a shot at him. But it's hard to win with your backup quarterback in the picture for QB1. And Green Bay's offense, especially last week against Tennessee, pretty damn good. Against, I think, a decent, pretty stout Tennessee Titans defense. I'm just painting the picture from the Vikings side because most are unfamiliar with it watching this. Like I said, assuming most are Packers fans since it's a very heavy Packers-centric channel on the Mitch I Am channel. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It's a good Vikings defense. It's a really good Packers offense. That's why I like this chess match. That's why it's going to be so fascinating. And I mentioned the Vikings are second in blitz percentage. How can the Packers counter that? Motion, motion, motion. If the defense is going to change the picture on you, change the picture on them. No team in the NFL. Remember, I said I try to only bring up numbers that mean something, that bring something to the table. not just use them as filler. I think Green Bay's pre-snap motion will be critical in this one because the Vikings are going to change looks. They're going to bring safeties up into the box. They're going to bring corner blitzes. They're going to move around where their linebackers are at. If you're Green Bay, you can counter that with pre-snap motion. Try to put them in uncomfortable situations. Try to put yourselves in advantageous spots. And it's one thing to say, hey, mix in some motion. It's another thing to look at Green Bay and realize they're a team that does that heavily. No team in the National Football League has put out more pre-snap motion than the Green Bay Packers through 3 weeks. Green Bay has had pre-snap motion on 85.9% of its plays this year. That's an absurd number. It's ahead of Miami. I bring them up because McDaniel's like the king of that too. Green Bay is number 1 in the NFL in pre-snap motion. That's why I look at this matchup. It's fun to talk about Aaron Jones and his return to Green Bay, but wearing purple. It's fun to talk about the alphas, Justin Jefferson and Jair Alexander. I'm telling you, where the bread will get buttered and how this game will be determined is who wins that chess match between Matt LaFleur and Brian Flores. And if Jordan Love's out there, I feel pretty damn good about the Packers' chances. If Jordan Love's out there, I'm assuming physically he's fine. It's this part up here. When you return from an injury and it's a knee injury or leg injury or something like that, a lot of times quarterbacks say, man, I just needed to get hit once. I needed to feel it once, get hit once, and get back up and be like, oh, I'm good. If anything, for Jordan Love, it might be a little up here after missing a couple weeks and coming back with a knee that if he's wearing a light brace, I'm assuming he's not 100% if he's back Sunday, but he's good enough to go. He's more than good enough to go. But you got to get over that mental hurdle. And I just, Packers offense, Vikings defense, that is the battle to watch. And it will be incredible to watch those two maestros, LaFleur and Brian Flores, go at it. Mitch, I am on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate all the support as we try to build the channel up. There are other things to talk about in this matchup. Does anyone, I've given Sam Darnold his flowers. I keep telling you I'm not a believer in him being a starting quarterback that can lead your team to a Super Bowl, even if he has immense talent and an immense scheme and coaching staff around him. I know they're 3-0. I know they beat San Francisco and Houston in back-to-back weeks, and they dominated the Texans, and they never trailed against San Francisco 2 weeks ago. I'm going to stick firm to that stance. And it's not like if the Vikings went to the Super Bowl this year and lost, I should wash my mouth out with soap for even suggesting that. But if that did happen and they lost, I would not say, I was right. They couldn't win a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. I'd still be shocked if they even reached that point. I'd be shocked if they reached a conference championship. And it's not a knock against Sam Darnold. Again, it's just I know situation matters a lot for these quarterbacks. Look at Malik Willis in Tennessee compared to Malik Willis in Green Bay. But in year 7, I think it is for Sam Darnold, I just can't imagine he's elevating that much. Like, I believe he was set up to fail in New York and Carolina because of coaching, because of scheme, because of the lack of talent around him. But I also can't believe that it's so good in Minnesota that he's all of a sudden an MVP frontrunner, and this is going to sustain itself through the course of a 17-game season. And I say all of that to say this. Anyone else feel like he's due for a dud? Anyone? Anyone feel like Sam Darnold's due for a dud on Sunday against a Jeff Hafley defense that has been pretty damn good through 3 weeks, especially in the last 2? That's what I'm wondering about. Like, I'm watching these Vikings games, and I'm like, what the hell is this going on over there in Minneapolis? I'll point out one weakness for you, the offensive line. Now, it is not to the degree of the Tennessee Titans, where Green Bay had 8 sacks and feasted on Will Levis's corpse last week, but it is a weak offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings, or at least has been. They have some high picks in there like Darisaw, and it just hasn't molded together yet. It's not a huge quarterback change in terms of mobility. Kirk Cousins was never a real mobile quarterback. Sam Darnold is more mobile than Kirk, but he's not known as a guy who's going to, dance around or get flushed out of the pocket, and that's where he really makes his money and makes his coin. He's an in-the-pocket passer. He's not a statue, but it's a similar, it wasn't a huge change in the offseason in terms of quarterback mobility for this Vikings offensive line to adjust to, yet they have struggled. Darnold was sacked 4 times last week. He's been sacked 3 on average per game this year. I think that's 21st in the NFL. I mentioned he's not, the most mobile quarterback. All 4 of his touchdown passes last week against Houston traveled less than 10 yards in the air. It was like some dink and dunk. We've seen him hit on the bomb plays, a couple of them. The 97-yarder the week before against San Francisco to Justin Jefferson traveled like 50 in the air or something like that. But all 4 touchdown passes last week against the Texans, none of them were over 10 yards in the air. All 4 of them, according to Next Gen Stats, came with no blitz, no pressure to be seen from the Houston Texans defense. I mean, they pretty much just handed it over to Darnold and said, we're going to give you a clean pocket. We're going to rush 4 and let you do what you may. And Sam Darnold and the Vikings picked him apart. Great game plan by Kevin O'Connell. It worked. 4 touchdown passes for Darnold in the win over Houston. Darnold, I mentioned all 4, 10 or fewer yards in the air on those touchdowns. He's 19th in pass attempts that travel 10-plus yards in the air. They have the home run hitters, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I would say if you consider a tight end a home run hitter, when Hawkinson gets back from injury, he qualifies as that. Jalen Naylor's been a pleasant surprise for them. They have home run hitters. Darnold hasn't lived in that world so far this season. They have some of those plays, but he's 19th among qualified quarterbacks in pass attempts. I'm not even talking completions, just taking those shots. He's 19th in pass attempts that travel 10-plus yards in the air. And so if I'm Jeff Hafley, I'm going down swinging in this one. I'm bringing the heat. Do not let Sam Darnold get comfortable. It sounds easy enough. Go execute. Don't let him get comfortable. Now, it can be pick your poison because you have to worry about Justin Jefferson. And it sounds like Addison's going to be back. And I mentioned Jalen Naylor's had a touchdown in back-to-back games. But this isn't some time for Green Bay to be like, whoa, Sam Darnold's been really good. We need to kind of back up and be conservative. No. Bring the pressure. This Vikings team is due to face some adversity. Darnold's been blitzed 14 times in 3 weeks. That's 30th in the NFL. For whatever reason, nobody's blitzing Minnesota. Nobody is. And Hafley's defense isn't really predicated on being blitz heavy, certainly not to the degree of Brian Flores and his defense. And that's fine. But I think matchups can get you to tinker a little bit. And I would love to see Green Bay bring the if you get, what would you rather see? Would you rather see Green Bay roll out something vanilla and say, hey, Darnold's been pretty good. Let's back it up and not get, beat deep. Let's not get the lid taken off the defense, even though the stats are saying he's living in a world of 10-plus yard passes, at least traveling through the air? Or would you rather say, hey, let's blitz a little bit more than we have these first 3 weeks? We're not facing a mobile quarterback like Jalen Hurts or Anthony Richardson or hell, even Will Levis. Darnold's not going to beat us with his legs. Let's bring more pressure this week. And if we get beat deep, at least we can say we went down swinging instead of playing conservative and a little hesitant. I want to see the Packers bring the heat this week. All the numbers would indicate, please do it. The guy's been blitzed 14 times in 3 weeks. It's 30th in the NFL. I don't know why. I can't break down, the Giants' defense, in every inch of it. I can't do the same for San Francisco or Houston. But for whatever reason, nobody's blitzing Minnesota in these first 3 weeks. Yet, even though that's the case, Darnold's still getting sacked 3 times a game. Which, like I said, I think it's 20th or 21st in the NFL. So teams are getting pressure. They're just not blitzing that much. And that word I used, adversity, it's time for the Vikings to face some. It's time for Sam Darnold to play behind the 8 ball. See how things really go for the Vikings then. Not saying they can't get it done if they start behind the 8 ball. It just hasn't happened this year. Think about this. We're 3 weeks in, folks. The Vikings trailed for 4 minutes in the first quarter against the New York Giants. They trailed for 4 minutes, 3-0. 3-0 they trailed. And then they scored a touchdown, went up 7-3. Never looked back. They did not trail for a single second against San Francisco or Houston. So in 3 games, they've trailed for 4 minutes, and it came in the first quarter against the New York Giants. Haven't trailed since. Put the pressure on them. Flip the script. Strike early and make them play from behind, and then see how it looks. Sam Darnold's getting a lot of praise, and rightfully so. Vikings haven't faced a lot of adversity yet. They've been up in every game for most of the game, outside of 4 minutes in week 1 in the first quarter. Make them play behind the 8 ball and then see how it looks. Aaron Jones reunion, yeah, I get it. And we can appreciate Aaron Jones, everything he was for the Green Bay Packers. Don't let him run wild on Sunday. Don't let him run wild. But again, the key in this one to me, LaFleur, Flores, and that chess battle. Packers-Vikings Sunday at noon. I don't like to pat myself on the back. Hate doing that. I'm proud of myself. I sat through this for damn near 25 minutes, and I don't think I appeared to be too antsy. Now, maybe some of you are like, what the hell is he talking about? Dude was fidgety as hell. I'm ready for Sunday. Let's change that goose egg for the Vikings and do a 1 in the loss column. We'll have an NFC North outlook tomorrow. Please subscribe to the channel. It is Mitch. I am on YouTube. We'll see you next time.